Welcome. I'm Patty McCormick with the Institute of Holistic Leadership. Thrilled you're with us today. We've got a great presentation, a great guest on a personal level. I can tell you one of the reasons I think he's so fantastic is he's my personal physician. And if any of you know me, for someone to be able to be my personal physician is stubborn and curious. I'll use both of those words as I am. He's been my physician for quite a long time. It's Patrick Jonas, MD. He is in Beaver Creek, Ohio. He is the owner and president of Neighborly Family Medicine. And the topic today, I think, is one of the most fascinating, and I think it affects so many of us for a variety of reasons that Dr. Jonas is going to talk to us about. His topic today is inflammation. And so, Dr. Jonas, let's just get started because there's so much information about inflammation. And we're going to take up all of the time, so I want to get started. So, okay. A lot of people are talking about the relationship of the inflammation and the pandemic. What health considerations do you think we need to, in a sense, be more aware of or focus our attention on now that we're through that pandemic?
So coming out of the pandemic, I think number one is mental health. That people are so stressed during the pandemic that whatever stress does got to do it over and over and over again. And then it became inflammation. Mm-hmm. And then we also had the virus and the vaccines and the variants, and those things were part of at least 75% of us in one way or another, which generates inflammation. And we look at where are we health-wise, crawling out of the pandemic. We're older, and we have chronic diseases, comorbidities, aging, and we have this extra inflammation coming from the pandemic, the virus, the variants, and the vaccines. So we look at what's our next health need and what should we do. Well, we need to figure out how to get rid of some of the chronic inflammation before we engage extra things, like they're inventing more shots for more diseases, and is there space in our body for those things? Mm-hmm. So we may need a flushing and looking at the total number of conditions and diseases and disorders and things under consideration by doctors now. We have to go backwards to the cell and to the mitochondria and say, okay, what does the human body do and what's generic and how do we address things from a common ground? And inflammation is one of the common grounds because all chronic diseases relate to an inflammatory basis.
Well, that leads me, and I love what you said about the mitochondria, and that's going to be another show, just as you say, how to keep our mitochondria healthy, because that's critical for health. That's another one in addition to inflammation. But why is this inflammation thing so detrimental and important to the quality of our life and our health?
Well, it kind of affects every organ, and we learned a lot during the pandemic about B cells and T cells and mediators. So inflammatory mediators, cytokines, flying around because of this or that. And did they ever stop? Well, they stopped sometimes. They didn't stop. Some people died even. But there was a lot of reactive oxygen species or free radicals involved in these chemical reactions of the virus, variants, vaccines, and all of our comorbidities, our aging and our degenerative processes, and our toxic exposures. So we're trying to figure out where do we grab and what do we do, but it hit every organ and everybody on the planet one way or another, and we need to figure out how do we refresh, how do we peel back, how do we look at the human condition and see what's our shortcut.
And I think, I remember, and I think it's been 20 plus years ago, Time magazine had on their front cover the word was inflammation, and they at that time were correlating it to heart disease and cancer. That it was, a piece behind it, and this was many, many years ago. I think exactly what you said. I think with the issue with COVID coming on in the pandemic, that just increased a lot of inflammation. And so, are you saying inflammation can actually cause or contribute to disease, specific diseases?
Every disease.
Every disease. Okay. What sources of inflammation do we have?
Well, we have internal and external. So the external, we have the toxic things. We obviously had viruses for a little while there, actually forever. We have different kinds of microbes. We have toxicants like chemicals and radiation, and there's things about 5Gs and various things like with cell phones and so forth. So we have external stimulants of inflammatory responses, and then we have internal ones, like our body's trying to decide what's us and what's them. So we found that the virus, the COVID virus, depressed tumor suppressor genes and autoimmune suppressor genes. So that which was protecting us from cancer and autoimmune diseases may have gotten pushed aside a bit. So those kind of things may start to kind of roar up, and there's an inflammatory basis to both of those. And then we look at the microbiome. We found that the virus dysregulated the intestinal microbes in a negative way, such that people can get more diseases, including apparently many psychiatric diagnoses can come as a result of disruption of the microbiome, and there are those who theorize that that's the only cause of all the psychiatric diseases. And then we look at the other external, not the least of which is glyphosate from things like insecticides and pesticides. And then we have East Palestine, Ohio, where we had all those toxic fumes or whatever coming out to Pittsburgh, and people have to contend with that. At the same time, they're contending with the very stressors of the pandemic and the physical stressors of the virus and the shots and so forth. Just kind of wild and crazy.
So many, many, many moons ago, when I went into nursing school, I learned in my first medical terminology class that anytime I heard the word itis, that meant inflammation. So what are some of the just daily complaints, diseases that we deal with on a daily basis, the public in general, that could be caused by this increase in inflammation that you're talking about? Just what are some basic diseases? Like my knee pain, could that be a inflammation?
You get your knee pain, or you get your sneezing.
Okay.
So this is like Ohio, and maybe cottonwoods are out there into May, and people are sneezing, and so they're getting allergic, inflammatory, reactive kind of phenomena in their head from white cells and eosinophils and immunoglobulins and whatnot. At the same time, they might have these extra microbes floating around from kids finally getting out and getting together again that might infect on top of the mucus from the allergy. So that adds more inflammation, because the body then gets T cells and B cells to fight, and those are inflammatory mediators. So they generate inflammation just to kind of get rid of the infection and the inflammation. There's inflammasomes. We have cool named things now that are actually inflammation makers, and something triggers them and they kind of get fired up. There's genetic predispositions to have them work really well or to be dysfunctional.
Okay. And in one of the lectures that you did at the school, I remember, if you could address that, you were even saying that after COVID, they were noticing an increase in a lot of GI or lower GI, irritable bowel syndrome, things like that. Is that due to the inflammation piece and the microbiome that you were talking about?
Right. So if you disrupt the microbiome, well, there's certain things that there's only one cell thick on the lining of the intestines. So if you find a way to pull that one cell apart a little bit, then intestinal contents may go into places where they're not supposed to be.
Okay.
That's called the leaky gut. The immune system doesn't like that, and it goes in to fix it. And it may kind of miss or exaggerate and catch the intestines. So there might be an inflammatory bowel disease, an autoimmune disease, or something coming from that particular scenario.
So you're saying things like arthritis, gastritis, all, like I mentioned before, all of the itises, those are actually caused by inflammation.
Yeah.
And we can make them better.
Right. And we hope so. And we can add choice-itis as one of our biggest problems, because we have so many choices. In fact, I have this book by E.O. Wilson, Consilience, the Unity of Knowledge, which is about the confluence of knowledge of all the disciplines that would be needed to deal with the problem like what we have currently.
Okay.
And what he talks about, though, is the arts. The dominating influence that spawned the arts was the need to impose order on the confusion caused by intelligence. So now we have so much intelligence about all these phenomena, and there's so many blogs and Substacks and whatnot, and things coming out every day from various governments and entities and things we belong to, massive amounts of email
And
overload.
Google and TikTok also that people are listening to.
So you get your overload, but in the pandemic, the arts were sort of crushed and pushed aside. So you couldn't go to a play or a theater or what have you, or even a church for a while. And he said that speaking about this, an individual human being is not, we don't live long enough to sort out experiences by means of generalized, unchanneled learning. So the arts fill the gap. The arts were the means by which these forces could be ritualized and expressed in a new, simulated reality. By the precision of their adherence, let's see, the quality of, anyway, it's all about the humanities, by the precision of their adherence to human nature, to an overwhelming degree, what we mean when we speak of the true and the beautiful in the arts are things that adhere to human nature. So now we're getting AI, and we're getting things coming in to change human nature when we want to get our human nature back after the pandemic. And we're all inflamed, so now there's hope. We say, okay, what do we do to get uninflamed? Those are some of the big questions.
Exactly. And I think if we surveyed most of the community and we said, do you have an itis? I'm sure a large percentage of people would have something that they're dealing with, a health issue. And as I mentioned before, if you go to Dr. Google, if you look at TikTok, there's a ton of experts out there. From your opinion, if someone believes they are dealing with, just to kind of reduce that inflammation in their body, what are some of the first things they could begin to do?
So first is look at the lifestyle. So lifestyles got stifled during the pandemic. And restorative sleep, 70% of people are sleep disrupted as a result of the pandemic. So we have to get restorative sleep back. Restorative sleep even is something during which our blood is slightly thinned so we don't get blood clots, but that sort of helps to clean up some of the stuff from the COVID era when we had more blood clot potential. Restorative sleep and stress reduction, whatever that means, eating the right food, nutrition. So the food supply is, how many 127 different food production plants were blown up or burnt down or something in the last 2 years. So we look at the food supply and say, can we get the food supply? And then you got the East Palestine people, obviously, with their food questions. Food, sleep, stress, and exercise. And exercise includes being outside, breathing outside, not just for vitamin D, but there's something about air that's good for our bodies, much better, say, than walking into our mold-infested basements.
I'm wondering what foods can cause inflammation?
Good question. So we know wheat used to be awesome, and then it was engineered in the 60s, and Dr. Davis wrote the book Wheat Belly to kind of express those changes that happen in the wheat. So the gliadin portion of gluten is now sort of pro-inflammatory for a lot of people. So there's a lot of inflammation from the wheat. There's problems with soy and corn because they're genetically engineered to have to not have a negative response to Roundup in particular. And so there are people who are concerned about those kind of genetically engineered foods that can cause problems in many people. We have the water supply that's of concern because people are drinking so much out of plastic bottles, and we're being plasticized, and there's like tons of plastic bottles in the ocean that's starting to contaminate fish. So the fish supply was suspect for the mercury before. Now we have plastics. We have some other questions there. And then there's concerns about animals, what the animals are eating. So if animals are grain fed and they're eating the wheat, and the wheat might not be so good for us, then we're sort of getting the wheat from multiple sources. So trying to figure out how do you get your clean food. People might start co-ops or something. The Weston A. Price Foundation is an organization that sort of goes back to whole foods and unprocessed foods and avoiding wheat and some other things. So there's organizations that even are trying to figure out what do you do about food and water and heat and light, because there's going to be failures of the power grid, so people are going to have trouble with freezing. So now they look at the food, the negative food, and say, can we clean it out of the body? And it looks like we probably can, because the body is amazing.
It is. It's amazingly resilient.
It knows what it is. It's got the self buttons, then it's got the other buttons.
You know, you mentioned the wheat piece. It was interesting. My husband had eczema when we first met on his hand. And in the first thing I said, you know, I said, give up wheat, give up dairy. And it took a while, but he finally did, and the eczema went away.
Right.
I could tell whenever he ate wheat, whenever he was at work and ate some cookies or something, because if he did it several days in a row, the eczema would come back. But what was fascinating to me is I have family over in Macedonia. And we went over, and it's a little village where you know, every morning you get up at 5 o'clock, or someone, the woman of the family gets up and goes to the store and buys 3 loaves of bread that someone has baked that day. It's interesting over there, and bread's a very important staple of every meal.
Yeah.
He was eating bread like I have never seen. He never broke out once with all that bread he was eating. He thought he was healed. We came back here. He thought he was healed, as I said, started eating wheat, and the eczema came back.
Right.
It's interesting. And when my family from Macedonia comes over here, when they're trying to make bread, because the concept of buying bread, why don't you just make it, is how they're kind of wired. She keeps saying this flour is not the same. It doesn't feel the same.
Right.
It doesn't bake the same. So we have really done a job to our food, and it takes a lot of work now.
We've done that. And now there's an epidemic of autoimmune disease, in fact, because of that. Which might be my next point, is the Walls protocol, the Walls diet. Terry Walls had multiple sclerosis and more or less healed herself from a total disability after going straight through the medical system on every drug you could do, and she just wasn't better. So they said, "Well, you're disabled. Your professorship is gone." And she said, "Well, I'm a doctor. I'm just going back to the basics." Went back to the mitochondria, back to food, and found that she could feed her body and heal it. So the Walls,
and she's an MD?
Yeah, she's an MD,
Interesting.
an internist. She stumbled into functional medicine. She didn't know there was such an animal. And she said, oh my gosh, this is very interesting. Basically, it's the first year of medical school. A lot of first-year students learn those kind of things, and then there's other things that sort of drive them in another direction. Bottom line, on her autoimmune diet, which is anti-inflammatory, anti-autoimmune, 3 cups of leafy greens, 3 cups of deeply colored vegetables and fruits, 3 cups of sulfur-rich vegetables. Which
is this per day?
Sounds like 9 cups, yes.
Okay.
And then she talks about different ways to do that. But it succeeded for her, and then for many others. Then she got undisabled and got her job back and was running a clinic at the VA in somewhere in Iowa. And she figured out how to help them to get the food that they could buy on the economy, not anything special, and helped all kinds of veterans to become healthy as a result of that. And she has great things in the book then about toxins and how to detoxify from certain kind of things also. But a great book. I love the Walls protocol, and she is on all kinds of videos on YouTube about autoimmune things, multiple sclerosis, diets, inflammation, autoimmune diets. Very, very interesting stuff, because we have to start somewhere.
So those would be the foods then you would recommend that could actually treat inflammation. The leafy vegetables, the fruits, things like that.
And the other thing is fats. So fat. Eat fat, get thin. Eat fat, lose weight. That's the title of 2 books. First one by Mark Hyman, the second one by the Weston A. Price Foundation President Sally, I can't remember her last name, Fallon. And those are things we have to kind of reverse the trend. Since 1977, we had an anti-fat movement from the Senate Select Committee on Nutrition when they decided fat was making everybody have heart attacks. And the data didn't really support that well, but that's what they went with. So that at that moment, weight started to go up in America, and about 10 or 20 years later, the diabetes started to go up because we kind of went the wrong direction. So now we got to get back to fats. There are certain kind of things that are really good. Coconut oil is a really good one.
So you're not talking Crisco?
I'm talking Crisco. So the Crisco lard is probably good.
Yes, I agree.
So looking at your great-great-grandma's cookbook might be a great place to start. Say, okay, that which made your family healthy might be genetically okay for the family tree, as well as cool stuff and fun to eat at Thanksgiving or whenever the family's getting together, to maybe start all over again. Start with the old food if you can, get the fats, and then look for specific. Some people can't tolerate histamine, so that's a subset of people that have to go with different kind of histamine stuff. There's about 17% of people have hyperactive mast cells, and they overreact to histamines.
Okay. So get those vegetables in. Those things have been said forever and ever, and a lot of people choose to ignore them. But those are the things that we need to get in, and the fats, as you mentioned, the healthy fats. So,
and it's the beauty of the smoothie machines now. Everybody's got a smoothie thing. They just go and throw it all together and hit the button. You got your hemp hearts and your flaxseed and your berries and your coconut oil and the other kind of things in there. Some people do the whole milk. Some people do almond, coconut, other kinds of milk things. There's good and bad news about every food on the planet.
It is.
So you just have to know yourself or know the family tree.
So what are some holistic strategies? In addition to food, what are some holistic strategies that people can use to take care of, reduce inflammation in their body?
So one is autonomic nervous system balance. So tone your vagus nerve. There's videos on YouTube toning the vagus nerve from Suki Baxter, Sukibaxter. She's got about 5 videos toning the vagus nerve. One is as simple as putting your hands behind your head and looking one direction with your eyes for 30 seconds, and then the other direction for 30 seconds. And during each of those, you'll swallow or sigh, and that's a little reset of the vagus nerve on that side. And that can relax the sternocleidomastoid muscle, the trapezius muscle, the facial muscles, and help you to feel safe. And also people that see your face then get a safety signal. For 2 years or so, we have not been able to get safety signals from other humans. That's stressful and that's inflammatory in our body. So to uninflame, we kind of relax the vagus nerve, relax those muscles, relax the face, and make eye contact with other people and touch other people, hug, shake hands, and also have dialogue. Dialogue is a critical thing to the recovery from the pandemic. People were so superficial for 2 or 3 years and kind of started to get afraid and irritable and not so excited about each other. And then there was a difference of opinion about shots or no shots, or masks or no shots, no masks. And it was sort of like going back to presidential elections in recent years where people would disagree, and people have to dialogue and get back together and hug, fix the vagus nerve, autonomic nervous system, give signs of safety. It was at like Kroger's where they had all the masks on, we had the masks on. You couldn't get a safety signal to decide to go through the lane. You might go back and buy 2 more objects because you're just not feeling like you should go through the line yet. And that's that your brain wants the safety signal so it can know that to connect other people. So safety signals, connection, human connection. But if you get the unsafe signal, then your other part of your vagus nerve takes you out of the room, like with what's called a dorsal vagal shutdown. It's in your fight or flight kind of thing, your flight part. But your flight part also includes a shutdown part, like when you're about to get hit by a train and you suddenly feel like terrified, and then you feel all calm, and you write a song like "Jesus Take the Wheel." That's your dorsal vagal shutdown. The vagus nerve was pre-programmed to do that to protect you.
Okay. Because we talked about the pandemic, are there any special considerations about inflammation that patients who either have had COVID or had the COVID vaccination or vaccinations, are there any special considerations that those individuals, may want to look at as they're trying to reduce their inflammation and become healthier?
Yeah, from what I read, and I've seen, read it every day, and tons of videos about all kinds of aspects of the virus, the various vaccines, the pandemic. So to flush toxins out of the body that may be left over from the virus, apples, mangoes, grapefruits, mushrooms are things that can help with that physically, and also fasting. So fasting enhances the natural design of the cells in a process called autophagy. That's the cell life cycle. So the cell then, if you're fasting, like intermittent fasting especially, that kind of fasting causes the cells to say, okay, we got no food, so let's look inside and see if there's something left over here we can eat. So eat debris left over from the virus or whatever, and anything left over then it takes to the surface of the cell, which allows the T cell, regulatory T cells that are floating around to see that, and then they eat that, they kill that cell. So every day we get 1 billion new cells, every day we lose 1 billion cells, and the T cells help to decide which ones ought to go out that are kind of affected negatively. So we get those kind of foods, those things about restorative sleep and so forth. A lot of people are using melatonin to get the better sleep for a while so they can recycle. And melatonin has, it's like an antidepressant also. It's used for sleep. It's kind of anti-inflammatory for brains and lungs. It has some slight anti-cancer effects that are being studied, but it's a generic kind of over-the-counter, and it's not going to be really studied because there's no way to make a lot of money as a result of whatever they find.
What dosage would you say to start out for for melatonin?
So melatonin, most people would go with a milligram because some people can really sleep fine on a milligram. If they get no response from that, they might go to 3, and some people end up with 10.
Wow.
But they wouldn't want to necessarily start with that because they might have some negative effects. And some people get some really intense, colorful dreams with the melatonin. It's dose related.
Okay.
And other holistic sort of nutraceuticals. So we look at the nutraceuticals, resveratrol is a spike cleaner. It helps to clean things up. And N-acetylcysteine is anti-inflammatory, anti-autoimmune. Curcumin and fish oil, those are the big 4 if you're looking at nutraceuticals to kind of help to finish off things and to prevent that memory unit access in the near future.
And with the N-acetylcysteine, that's a lot of us call it NAC.
Yeah.
How many milligrams should someone start with that?
So NAC is 600 milligrams twice a day. It's been studied for every psychiatric diagnosis and had some positive effects in every one of them in a subset of people. As well as autoimmune, you got your caudate nuclei, your Center for Obsessive Thoughts and Behaviors, about 1.5 inches in there. It tamps those down and helps people to stop some of those obsessive thoughts that everybody had during the pandemic.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for being a part of this and coming on and sharing your knowledge. Just from what we talked about today, I see several more shows specific to topics that you just kind of had to glance over just because of our time limitations. So thank you so much for being a part of us. I will say Neighborly Family Medicine is in Beaver Creek, Ohio. So if anyone wants to get a hold of you, our website will be on the end of the show. The credits at the end of the show, you'll see our website. And then at that point, you can contact us and we can share information about Dr. Jonas with you. So thank you so much, and thank you for joining us today.